Are you ready to get started?
Yes, I'm ready to get started. Yeah.
Perfect. So welcome everyone. We have about 13 of you joining us today. We are so thankful that and connecting with us virtually from your homes. I hope that you're all safe and staying healthy. We'll get through this very soon, hopefully. My name is Carolina, and I'm Associate Director of Alumni Relations. Again, we're very proud to be able to bring these informative lectures to the comfort of your homes during this time. And thank you again, Dr. Monteiro, for taking the time to share your knowledge and wisdom with our alumni. I know that you'll be speaking about mass communications and politicized communications, and specifically the history of fear, anxiety, and uncertainty. This is also critical during these tough times. So thank you again for making yourself available to all of our alumni. And thank you to your bird for also letting you today. I'm sure that he's needy right now and he wants to be with him. So we appreciate that. So just quickly, you are a man that needs no introduction, but I do want to spend a couple of seconds just sharing a little bit of your background. Dr. Monteiro is the associate professor in the Department of Mass Communications. He's also director of the Institute for International Communications and chair of the Division of Mass Communication at St. John's University, which is a mouthful. He specializes in communication and development, media and public policy, and politics of peace building and human rights. So you have quite an extensive resume, and I'm sure that this will be extremely informative to everyone who's tuning in. We are recording this session, Dr. Monteiro, so everything that you say will be available to our alumni and all your students at a later time. So feel free to share as much as possible. In order to keep this very interactive, everyone, please feel free to use the Q&A bar at the bottom left of the screen. I'm actually working off of two. Dr. Monteiro, right to see the best to the top right of your screen and select the active speaker and thumbnail video view, which is the best way to see him. So without further ado, Dr. Monteiro, thank you again and take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Carolina. I really appreciate your kind words. And thank you very much for this opportunity. And also, thank you for all those who are gathered here this evening. I'm sure they had better things to do, but somehow they thought it may be a little helpful or useful to listen to my little few things that I may have to say about the history of pandemics, the communication of pandemics, and the whole communicative process throughout the history, how it has evolved. I have two birds that kind of float around here, and so you hear them chirping, but I hope they will add a little bit of fun time for this conversation. Now, keep in mind, I'm not going to give so-called lecture, but I'm going to like to have discussions and conversation with you. And so feel free to pop in, send questions. I will keep my eye on the chat bar and interrupt me. And so that's how we'll do it, okay? So what I want to do today is, within the short time that we have, I'm going to focus on three areas. One is the politicized communication of pandemics. Throughout the history, we have seen how any communication around pandemics is politicized. I use the word, it becomes weaponized against the powers to be, whoever's in power, use as a weapon to accomplish what they want to accomplish or do what needs to be done. The second point I want to discuss a little bit later today also is the politics of anxiety. The politics of anxiety, how anxiety itself becomes, again, a tool of social relations, how social relations get established, and also how it gets politicized in the process. And the third point I want to emphasize, I just want to talk a little bit about, is the words we use to describe our experiences, to describe our relationship with this virus, for example, the words we use. So what I'm going to do there is going to talk a little bit what we call the ecology of the words. Words have power, and we can define and shape, by the words we use, define and shape the other, and we define and shape the reality by the kind of words we use. So having said that, let me now go to the first point of how the politicization of communication around pandemics. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a long historical perspective so that we want to understand that, yes, these are pandemics have come and gone, but human behavior around pandemics has not changed. First of all, before human beings existed, there were pandemics. That means virus has been part of the earth ecology before human beings were there. So we should not think that somehow the fellow showed up from nowhere and is trying to make our life difficult. So from the recorded history that we have, I'm going to take you back to year 430 BC in Greece, in Athens and in Sparta. I'm sure you have heard of the Peloponnesian Wars. And what happened is there was a Sparta and Athens, they were at each other for a long time. And Sparta had upper hand because they had, they were land-based and they had more people there as well. Whereas Athens was a seaport and, it was always susceptible for other people to come in, but it was a seaport. It was a port area. And so you had a lot of quote unquote foreigners coming in there, doing business and that kind of stuff. So I'll tell you why I kind of make that point. I'll tell you a little bit later why I made that point to you. So what happens around 430, Athens had an upper hand in the war and they were about to win. But suddenly they began to lose the war. And what happened? It was an epidemic. There was a disease that came along, and at that time people were just dying. And this death, they were wondering where it come from. And as a result, Athens lost that war. But guess what happened? Who are they blaming for this epidemic? Because it came from the port of Athens. Now, what happens at the port? You have the density, people come, there is a density of population, more people live in port areas, like, for example, Manhattan. So you can see now why Manhattan became the epidemic, the center, or the epicenter of the whole pandemics here. So the port area tends to attract more and more people, and thus you have the higher density. And there we have a higher density of population. It becomes an incubator for all kinds of diseases because necessarily when there are more people living in a smaller space, you have a sanitation problems and all kinds of stuff, right? So it becomes an incubator for all kinds of diseases. So, the Athenians began to blame the people from Attica who were coming down to the port area and says, they are the ones who brought a disease. Sounds familiar? They brought a disease. And the disease, they were blamed on them. Now what happens, you will see throughout the pattern, I'm going to give you a few historical examples just to show you how the human behavior has always been almost the same. Nothing has changed around when these pandemics happen. Whenever there are these kind of epidemics, people get anxious and they're always trying to say, wait a minute, now what happened to me? And what has happened to me is because somebody else's fault. Somebody did this something to me. If you were not in my presence, if you're not in my area, I would have been okay. So you are the one responsible. So we are always looking for somebody, for someone to blame, to scapegoat. And so that is our kind of tendency. I'll talk a little bit more about it when I talk about the politics of anxiety. So now, fast forward a little bit, just to show another example. Around 400 BC, not BC, but AD, it was known as the Justinian plague in Rome. You all have heard of a fellow by the name Attila, and people know about Attila as Attila the Hun. So he was a general. He was trying to invade the Rome and come into the Rome, and he was almost there, but somehow he could not enter Rome because what happened? his soldiers suddenly were not performing as well as they were performing all along, and so they lost the battle, and Rome was saved. So what happened? Again, another pandemic, and which really killed a lot of people around that time. And this pandemic was why the soldiers, what happened to the soldiers is they were coming from other places, and so they kind of traveled with the virus, and it was manifested by diarrhea. And so as a result, the soldiers could not stay on the horses for too long, and they had to severely abandon that whole plan to invade Rome. Again, a lot of Romans died. So who are they blaming? They're always finding somebody to blame. So they were saying, okay, now this uh, plague came via Ethiopia, via Libya, and that's how it ended up in from Libya across the ocean, across the little body of water. It ends up in Rome. It ends up in Italy, and then ends up in Rome. So always looking where it originated and finding. So again, I just want to draw a parallel here for you to see how we're always saying this virus came from China, this is one virus, and so all kinds of things, where it come from. So this tendency to kind of blame on somebody, to scapegoat, has been with us throughout our human history. So, and then why the communication around pandemics becomes so politicized? Because there are a couple of things we have to keep in mind. All diseases are not equal. Some diseases are okay. It's okay to get sick. For example, somebody gets a heart attack and says, oh, poor thing, and uh, nobody's going to ostracize this particular person. But there are other diseases that people get scared around the disease. People don't know what to do because they see certain manifestation. They say, okay, if I get closer to you, I'll get sick. So they get those kind of diseases where people somehow need to stay away from the other person for their own self-protection. Those diseases tend to get stigmatized. And because they get stigmatized, a couple of things I want to highlight. One, the powers to be, the governments, then and now, do not want to fully acknowledge how many people actually died, because when they say that this many people died, it is seen as a weakness of the government. The government failed. So they always try to suppress the numbers. Now, again, you hear these things today in almost every country. They're saying, oh, no, the numbers are almost double. And so then people ask why the government does not tell us exactly what it is, because there is a political value there. If the government simply acknowledges that, oh, a million people died, the government is looking bad. Government is looking like, so when they say, okay, when the government says, oh, only 20,000 people died, okay, we did a pretty good job. So it is in the favor of the power to be, who is in power, to control, to mitigate the numbers, to simply suppress the numbers, not to tell the truth about it. So we are always, other thing we have done, we see throughout the history, is finding a scapegoat where this is. Because what happens now? Another reason for the politicization of communication is every time these kind of pandemics take place, there is an upending of the social structure, economic structure. All the structures suddenly fall apart. And these structures, as they fall apart, then what happens? They, the power, those who are in power, they want to stay in power. So in order to stay in power, they have to do everything possible in their hands to stay in power. So as a result, what do you find? You find that the you find any way to manipulate this information about pandemic, and that manipulation becomes a weaponized communication by blaming somebody else, by suppressing the numbers, and internally as well, saying that the struggle of I'm doing a better job than anybody else could have done. So you can see what is also happening, the whole narrative and whole discourse around pandemics. Also, we are beginning to see around in our times as well. Not only in the United States, but also in every country, whatever country you go to, you will find the same kind of situation. You'll find it. I see a question here. So the question is, David is asking, have any pandemics resulted in the government being overthrown due to the mishandling of the response? Yes, however, not right away, not immediately. Uh, the, the systems of the government has been totally transformed. For example, I'll give you an example of the medieval ages, the so-called famous or infamous black plague. The Black Plague, what happened? It destroyed the feudalism. It took some time. It took almost 30 years, and almost 50 years later on, we began to see the change taking place. It destroyed the feudalistic system of the time, and then set that particular time, set the way for eventual democratic system that particularly the Western democracy, the social democratic system that began to evolve as a result of this. Pandemics have a way of not so much overthrowing the way we understand, a coup d'etat kind of thing, but suddenly from bottom starts corroding and starts losing control, and then eventually you'll begin to see people losing power, and people are. It's a kind of a little bit of a generational process. I'll give you one simple example. Those who are 20-something today, 10 years from now, they'll become the leaders of the society, the managers or whatever position. They are the ones who are going to make policies later on. And you'll see this experience will be their defining experience, will be their guiding principle. And they'll start changing policies, they'll start changing systems, they'll start, everything will be reflected through the experience that they have gone through this pandemic. And that is how the changes takes place. You may not find overthrowing of the government immediately as a kind of coup d'etat, but it is eventual, slowly begins to fall apart. And because people's experiences are going to take shape, or going to inform the public policy that is being shaped. So I hope I've given you some kind of satisfactory answer there. And now, just to kind of put a little cap on this point of the politicization of communication. See, communication is power, and power is whoever has the megaphone, whoever can amplify their voice has the power of communication. That means this particular entity, this particular unit, because of the capacity of amplifying, they can control the narrative. And the narrative remains for a long time in a particular, the way it was constructed by the victors, by those who in power. And eventually what happened is history has a way of studying, going back and pointing out. A lot of things, for example, we know today about the history of pandemics. Even the one that examples I gave you about the Peloponnesian War in 430 BC, then the Justinian plague in 450, and then in the Middle Ages, the Black Plague. All those plagues, they kind of we have been able to restudy them and kind of reconstruct what has happened. Now, my next point that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is politicization of anxiety. A few years ago, there was an interesting book that was very popular. It's called Politics in the Times of Anxiety. And kind of set this whole conversation, how the politics gets constructed in the times of anxiety. But now the anxiety itself gets politicized. And let me elaborate a little bit on that. See, anxiety is a human reality. Philosopher Kierkegaard, Heidegger, Lacan, they've spent considerable amount of time in trying to understand this thing called anxiety. The first one to look at this piece was Søren Kierkegaard, whom I had opportunity to study very closely many years ago, and kind of looks at this, what is anxiety? It kind of points out that anxiety is a kind of a human, accompanies human life. And it is there, and it's not necessarily about something, but it is there. And what do we do? It's anxiety about not about the unknown, what will happen. And the unknown is always part of our lives. We are driving the car, we are walking around, we are going somewhere, we just don't know what is ahead of us. And so naturally, that human anxiety is part of our living. Um, how do the times of pandemics, anxiety gets overly politicized? See, it is very understandable that during the time of pandemics, the level of anxiety goes up simply because unknown. Just the anxiety of being in the presence of somebody else. I'm in the presence of my friend, my colleague. It gives me anxiety because I don't know if my colleague, if my friend with whom I'm in the company of, or they pass on the disease to me. Or I may pass on the disease to him or to her, whoever is around. So there is this anxiety that simply is in place. And now imagine what this anxiety does to us. So it becomes afterwards a collective anxiety. Everyone is anxious. Now, once everyone is anxious, the political entities, they tend to see there is an opportunity for them because this anxiety, they can take this anxiety and make a constructive political narrative around it. Let me highlight two things here. We have a virus, coronavirus, and we have also lockdown. Which one is better? It's kind of, choose your poison. Either you want to die of disease or you're going to die of hunger. How do we do this? And you can begin to see the tension is existing where the governments are saying, open up the economy. Others are saying, wait a minute now, more people will die. Now, you're beginning to see the tension is coming along there because we need food. We need to survive physically. Otherwise, we'll destroy our health as well and we may die. On the other side, if we go out, we may get infected. And as a result, we may have we may die as well. So the choices before us are not terribly exciting. They're not pretty choices. So how do we deal now? Both are causing anxiety. Now this becomes a perfect tool in the hands of the politicians to manipulate people towards their own advantage. If you play up, say for example, the economic piece of it, of course, you'll say, let us open up, and powers to be will say, see, no, this is now, life is getting better. Life is getting back to normal, because getting back to normal, whatever that normal is something that we are always striving for. Now, the normal, once you get that anxiety weaponized, you can begin to imagine the consequences that will have on people's lives. Their anxiety is further heightened as a result of the politicization of anxiety. So how do we express this collective anxiety? Now, let us look at the media. Every day we turn on something, we open a newspaper, television, radio, whatever it is, we're talking about coronavirus. We're talking a very depressing news. And it's kind of, we have no choice but somehow stare at it, somehow listen to it, somehow look at it, and somehow, be immersed in that. And you want to run away from it, you will say, I don't want to see this anymore. I've had enough of it. Okay. But the other side, you're talking about other problem, and that is the problem of economy, the lockdown. People are losing jobs. People are having hard times. People are difficulty making their basic necessities meet. So that is also is creating further problems, further tensions, and further anxieties as well. Now, what the media is doing, and the question that I want to pose here is this: how much is enough? How much communication about disease? How much communication about lockdown, economic problems is enough? Is there an enough thing, or we have to just keep talking? Now, if you look at the media, professional media, the business of media, what we're seeing is constantly 24 hours, 7 days a week, constantly talking about this. And this, now, some would say, if you don't talk, what is wrong with them? They're not addressing the problem of the times. If you do talk, you're talking too much. How much is too much? And this is our struggle. The struggle we are having constantly is how much information is sufficient for us to calmly acknowledge our problem and learn to deal with it. We see, for example, Fauci, our famous Fauci scientist, almost in all, only in the last couple of weeks, I've not seen, but in the last month of March, April, he was almost every day on every television. Besides being in the White House, he was also almost on television, every television channel. And because he felt that there was a need to reach out to various audiences, specific, at least say, scientific information, factual, science-based information, to put it out there. And he wanted to preempt any kind of, fake news might take over and somehow. So he wanted to people know upfront, and that's why you will find him on all channels available, even on what is that channel at nighttime, the comedy channel, Trevor Noah. So he's as well. So you see him, you could see him everywhere. And why? He says there are audiences are everywhere, different audiences. Not everybody watches CNN, not everybody watches MSNBC or Fox. So he would go wherever the opportunity, simply because he felt that certain scientific information had to be given out there as a kind of a preemptive way of letting people have the necessary information. Now, we would say, okay, that's many of us, some people may disagree, but most of us would say, oh, that's good enough for us, because now we understand the science behind this little problem. Not little problem, it's a big problem. And so we know rationally what to make of it. But keep in mind, when there is anxiety, rationality takes backspace. Rationality somehow loses its place, and it becomes an emotional situation, an emotional way of acting and reacting to everything. So when we are anxious, we tend to react rather than act. So we are reacting all the time when our anxiety gets heightened up. Now, I see a comment, many of my friends have turned out the media to reduce the anxiety. Just negative report after negative. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's a constant barrage of telling people what is going on, and what is going on is not good news. Now, there is a little problem there, or a little question there. And the question is this: should people know how many people are dying? Should people know how many people are infected? Is that a useful information? Now, this is the difficulty we have. Some would say, I don't need to know how many people are dying. Others would say, yes, I need to know how many people are dying. Now, is that the responsibility of the media? Media will say, it is our responsibility to tell the facts out there that today that many people died, and that's why it's important for us to let you know. You may not like it, but here it is. So we have difficulty handling bad news, because when it comes to bad news, we don't know how, because it has a tremendous impact on our lives. And so we don't know how much is enough and how much we need and how much we should, there is no need to go to get anything more. So that is the very most difficult part of it. So in terms of, I hope I gave you a little bit of an how the anxiety gets politicized, an advantage of, and the political powers, the political parties, or the political powers, let me say, tend to take advantage of it and play one against the other. Um, Now, let me go to the third point that I want to talk to you about is the words we use. And what I mean by the words we use, and this is my personal reflection, and I wrote a little piece on that. And we call the coronavirus, our enemy. We call it evil, and we begin to say we have to fight it, we have to kill it, we have to destroy it, we have to conquer it. And so, think about it. Think about the language we are using. Now, that language is kind of constructing. What does it say, that language? That language says that we human beings, we're in the age of Anthropocene. We human beings are above everybody else in this chain of food of the species. All the species on the planet, we are on top, and therefore we are going to tell all other species what to do and how they live and who is going to live, who should be killed and who should not be killed. Now, that has been our position for almost 2,000 years. For whatever reason, we think that on the planet, we have somehow some kind of a supremacy about other species. Therefore, we'll dominate, we'll find. And we kind of use, since the time of the Enlightenment, the notion of science. And the science will find ways of killing anyone that hurts us. Will kill anyone that tends to affect us negatively. And so the science will be a way of doing it. Now, science has been able to control many of these viruses, put in check, build defenses around this with the vaccines and all, but we have not been able to totally destroy them or eliminate them. Now, let me put a bigger frame to this. Before there were human beings, there were these viruses and there were pandemics. And pandemics is nothing, not response. However, what has happened is humans have disrupted the ecosystems. The ecosystems of these creatures, of this species, and these species are part of the life of the ecology of the planet. So they play a significant role. I'm trying to raise a question here. By using the language we use, then we're saying, okay, if I say that I have the supremacy over everything, I'm going to, so what I do, I will, just because I have the power to do, and I have the technology to do, I have the wherewithal to do, I'm going to go to an ecosystem and build a house there, destroy the whole place, destroy the whole forest, and clean it up, the whole thing, and then build a house. And then push all these species aside, further them. And this is how we have done our development. It's very interesting to see how I think this morning it was in California, that in one of the empty roads, suddenly about 300 goats showed up. Suddenly they said, oh my goodness, this is our place. We were here before these things called human beings showed up. We were here. This is our place. They're reclaiming. We saw similar things taking place in Scotland as well, and northern part of England too. So the animals, the goats, the cows suddenly showed up. So this is where we used to be before. This is our land. And so now see what is happening is that the human beings have kind of expanded themselves, and they felt that they have the right to go to wherever we go. But in the process, what has taken place is we've destroyed the ecosystem. And now once the ecosystem is destroyed, these species they need to live somewhere. So where they are finding to live? Well, this particular coronavirus decided to find a place to live in our bodies. So that's where now this virus is living. So he was living, he or it or she, whatever pronoun you want to use, was living somewhere else. But we disrupted that ecology, and we went there in their territory, and now it says, okay, you came to my territory, I'm coming to your territory now. So that's kind of, so look at the ecology, the planet Earth as an ecology. Everybody has a role to play. and then no one is kind of has a supremacy over anything and anyone, and we live in a partnership, in relationship with all these other species as well, and then you begin to have this harmonious living within the ecology of the earth. So when I raise the question about the ecology of the words, now the word ecology simply means relationships. So we live in a relationship with each other. And one of the things that this pandemic has taught us is, and every pandemic, by the way, has taught us, we are interdependent. We became, particularly in the United States, we became very highly individualistic since 1976, by mid-1970s. The whole culture within, the wealth was increasing and everybody's talking about, oh, my right, I am the one who only matters, me, myself, and I. That kind of thinking became normalized. It says, okay, and then what about, and the other, I'm simply tolerating. So we can kind of say, okay, I'm tolerating you. Just imagine, you simply are tolerating me. Is that enough? So am I simply tolerating you? Is that enough for you? No, shouldn't be more than just tolerating. So these are new phenomena. In fact, one of our professors at Oxford University recently wrote a very interesting piece on the end of individualism, and how individualism is kind of beginning to lose its prestige, its value the way it was built up in the last 30 years. So now, going back to the notion of ecology, ecology is something that is about relationship. We live in a relationship with each other. We live in a relationship with other species. So this recognition that planet is also needs other species other than human beings is very important for us to understand. Now, I say this particularly because our biggest problem is not only going to be this pandemic, our biggest problem is going to be also climate change. Now, pandemic came into one fine day and everybody was shut down, locked down, stay inside. So we saw within 2 months the devastation it caused. Climate change devastation is incremental. It is not happening everywhere the way this coronavirus has done. It's incremental. So every time an ecosystem is destroyed somewhere, it has consequences. And we'll begin to see the more frequency of pandemics as the ecosystems are going to be destroyed as time passes by. And so far pandemics of this kind of nature has shown up every 100 years, 150 years or so, or maybe 200 years. But we had smaller epidemics, which we managed to, given our scientific power, we managed to control that. But this one, all the scientists, all the science, existing medical science off the road. They couldn't find anything in their tools. So imagine. So we will be seeing more frequently because more and more ecosystems are destroyed, and the species from these ecosystems have to find a way of living. So what they will do, they're not going to go away. They're going to find a way to live in our midst, and in our homes, and in our bodies. And that is the biggest challenge that is awaiting us. So it is the problem right now is not just addressing the issue of pandemic, but also addressing the issue of climate change, because it is a fact of life that the effects of the climate change are here. They are beginning to, if you travel around the world, you begin to see that happening, and very soon, about in your lifetime, those who are younger ones, you will see it happening in about 30 years. You will see the powerful impact, the catastrophic impact of demolitions of the ecosystems that human species is engaged in. We are so much engaged in the name of development. We are building our cities, for example. I think one of the big questions which I discuss with my students in the context of development is the future of urbanization. Is the way to go, urbanization? the way we're doing, high rises. Imagine Manhattan, you know, how many mice and rats are underneath our wonderful glass buildings that we have in Manhattan? And the mice and the rats are the biggest carriers of all kinds of diseases. Now, but you don't find the mice and rats in that kind of quantity in suburban areas, outside in the farm areas. They're there, but not in one small place. Now, when you have in a small place that many in our subway systems and all, they're full of rats and mice, which are carriers of disease, all kinds of diseases. So, yes, on top, above, we have these fancy glass buildings and everything, where we are packed hundreds of people in each building, thousands of people living in a small place. But just because you say, oh, okay, we are living vertically, now, is that sustainable? Is that sustainable? Just think about it. So the kind of high density cities we are building, and China is one of the terrific examples of this, because in the last 20 years, 30 years, they've been building cities just like that from nowhere in desert areas and everywhere, just building cities and bringing people from the far out places into the city, into this city they built. And so they were packing that many people into these smaller places simply because it was raised vertically up. So just think about it. So now there are a couple of questions here. Many of my friends have turned out me to reduce the anxiety, one negative report after another. Yes, there are also a spread of conspiracy theories. Yes, I will want to talk about it. Capitalizing on pandemic to spread the idea the pandemic is for a new world order. Okay, whatever that means. Some are also saying there is a ploy by some individuals and groups to depopulate the world. Do you think that a dramatic slowdown in economic activity due to pandemic will slow the real rate of global warming? Now, let me address the last question first, and I'll go to the earlier one. Since I was on this topic of climate change, already we are seeing the changes in the last 2 months with the lack of vehicular activity. I mean, the cars, on the streets, trucks and the planes and everything else. We're beginning to see skies. We're beginning to see. There was an interesting yesterday. BBC had an interesting clip on northern part of India in Himalayas. The people in the villages suddenly they're saying, "Oh my God, I've never seen from my house that I could see the mountain of Himalaya. I've never seen the valley there." So the beginning to see what they've not seen in 30, 40 years. And the whole generation that grew up without seeing those kind of things, now they're seeing from their own backyard. A good example, there are many wonderful examples in the last 2 months. Let me point, for example, in Venice, in Italy, suddenly the waters are clean, the birds have come back everywhere, and so you have the renaissance of the nature. There is a renaissance of nature. That nature is suddenly reliving. Now, yes, I've read scientific studies that point that yes, it will slow down the rate of global warming. If we change our particularly the energy source, if we are not using fuel, fossil based energy, yes, we'll have a better chance of of a better life. But thankfully, there are a lot of technologies that are being developed. Say, for example, in Europe, in Netherlands, they're building something called Hyperloop. And Hyperloop is a kind of the train that fast train that people don't have to go and live in the city to find job. They can go from Amsterdam all the way to Geneva within 45 minutes. And so that means they can commute to work. They don't have to move there. And so if we build this kind of technologies, more and more region-based mobility technology to move the people, you'll see the changes taking place. You'll see kind of the urban planners are going to rethink how the cities are going to be built, and kind of more and more begin to see people kind of rethinking how our living conditions are. Is this the way to live? The earlier question was conspiracy theories. Let me address that question. It's a it's an unfortunate thing. And you always want to ask why there are people who think this way, why there are these kind of minds. And the sad part of it is they always have been there. We find, going back in literature 2000 years ago, there has been conspiracy theorist. Someone who thinks that there is, I don't know, it looks like they're getting some kind of pleasure, some kind of satisfaction to say, oh yes, I came up with this idea and here it is. It is, again, it adds to the anxiety of the people. And especially this pandemic, what they were blaming now, someone blaming on this poor fellow, Bill Gates, that he's behind it. Some because he wants to sell his computers. Some people are saying it is a lab in a one that was developing this. All kinds of things are coming out, and see, the notion of the new world order is not new. Every 100 years, we begin to see that our systems do not work. They're not working. Our political systems that we put in place, they don't work. And every 100 years, we have to go through some kind of a reinvention or tweaking our systems that are in place. We don't have to necessarily demolish them completely, but we have to transform. Yes, in the past, there was a new world order. For example, Black Plague. Black Plague brought in a whole new world order. It destroyed feudalism. It destroyed the oppression of the people that the rich people they were having them, and they were oppressing these people. So it destroyed, because what happened is it killed so much population during the Black Plague, about millions of people, and as a result, there was a shortage of labor. There was a shortage of labor. So now the labor demand price went up, the cost, the salaries or the wages went up. It could live a little better. And then, interestingly, with the fall of the feudal system, it opened up the Renaissance movement in Italy. All the Renaissance movement had taken place. And then eventually from that, now it opened up the doors for the social democracy that the Europeans have embraced. We had also embraced social democracy up until 1980s. And from 1980s, with Ronald Reagan as president, it kind of moved more and more into market economy democracy, market-based, where market becomes the driving force instead of the social democracy, instead of the social life of the people. So we had that up until the 1980s. And when the economic privatization of everything, of healthcare, privatization of airlines, everything had to be privatized. Privatization of the media, anything, and his slogan was "Government is bad," and so get the government off my back. That was his slogan at that time, and kind of changed that social face of the democracy into more and more capitalism, and I like to call it dog-eat-dog capitalism type of system was put in place, or is in place right now. And that is also, the pandemic kind of exposed the weakness of our public health system. And that is one of the reasons we have the high number of deaths that we have in the nursing homes, because nursing homes are very weak in the system. It's a very weak system that we have in place. And so, in any case, I hope I kind of given some little satisfactory answer there. There's another answer, a question from Maria. Where do you see the immediate paradigm shifts in the United States as a direct result of COVID? Healthcare, workforce, working remotely, childcare. Wonderful question. This is a question that I think a lot of policymakers are engaged in right now. I think what is going to happen, this is just my way of looking at it, is healthcare is going to be at the forefront, because people have experienced directly what kind of healthcare is available. Either they don't have healthcare, or if they do have, it's a very, very poor healthcare they have. So I think people will start coming up with that. May not be this coming election, it's too soon, but by next round of elections, we'll be seeing that some kind of transformation, that the question of healthcare system will be. Some already are pointing out that healthcare might be the main platform for the Democrats in the coming presidential election. And other question also of the workforce as well. See, I think this pandemic has shown to us how many people live on quote unquote day-to-day wages. We have a fancy name for some of that. We call it gig economy. Gig economy, consultants, we call them. Everybody feels good. It's a fancy name. These are nice euphemisms that we use. Oh, I'm a consultant. That sounds wonderful. But you're living on day-to-day wages. Imagine that. And so if you are able to make money, whatever money you're making as a consultant, then you have an opportunity to go to the client. And so if you don't have a client, if you don't go out there looking for clients, I tell many of my students after they graduate, they say, "Oh, I have a good job." I says, "What are you doing?" "I'm a consultant now." And I said, "As a consultant, you're working for this company. Do you have healthcare? Do they put anything away for your retirement? They provide you any benefits out of that? Nothing. So they give you the check looks nice because it's a consultant, but nothing is taken out of it. But see, it's a mind game. These words, that's what I was saying earlier. The words have a way of playing this mind game. We use a lot of euphemisms, consultants or gig economy. Sounds wonderful. Oh, I'm part of the gig economy. Now, where are they? What happened? System collapse. So it is. I think we are going to start addressing the question also the workforce as well, because that is going to focus on how we are going to reorganize our economy. The economy is going to be the way it is, or my favorite economist is a fellow who lived in the 70s, E.F. Schumacher, and his famous book is Small is Beautiful. And he was an economist who advocated for regional supply chains, not transnational supply chains, not like making one country the factory of the world. Suddenly we realize we made China the factory of the world. And suddenly we said, my goodness, that's a bad thing. And so as if like we do not know, a lot of people have been saying this is not a good idea for a long time, but who paid attention to it? Now they're forced to it. So now we're talking of, we have to start looking at the regional supply chain. What are the benefits of the regional supply chain? Regional supply chain will give, and if this better transportation systems are developed, people will move or will commute to go to work. And that way, income will go up because at the local level, the economy will be, supply chain becomes regional. And so all those kind of benefits that you begin to see, you'll find them there. So the yes, we'll be questioning how the economy is structured. And other question that I think it's a very interesting, and I really don't know how to answer the question, is the childcare. The childcare is a very big problem there, because every time a parent has to go to work and the child has to stay at home, what happens? So we have, in the last many decades, we have developed our school system as an extension of the family, as an extension of the child care, family caretaker. Okay, you go to work, we'll take care of your child. Send your child to us, to our school. And then the school has become kind of the babysitter for the child. And in fact, in many ways, it's lost its own way of understanding as well what its purpose is. And that is the teaching and education and learning kind of gets sometimes a little shortcut because we have to take care of this problem. Child has problems and we can't send them at home. If they have to come to school to eat, that's where we get the food. Otherwise, so see, we have used our school system as as an extension of the family. And we have to begin to ask the question, is it a good idea? So now, I think we may have to ask also, one of the parents may have to stay home, but our economy demands that both parents go to work, because one person's income is not enough to provide decent living. I'm not even saying high living, but decent living to the family. You need both incomes. And this is the kind of situation we are in. And so the question of childcare is a very serious question, it's an important question. And I hope that people will start paying attention to it. Another question you're raising also is rural living increase. I really hope that people begin to understand that the notion of development is not to say, oh, I enjoy living in the city, it's wonderful, and therefore I'm now a developed person. I live in my life is better now. And if you live in a village, oh, you are a village kind of person. See, again, language, right? And how we associate with the words. It's, oh, you're living in the village, that's more, you must be backward. So the word backward, see what are the connotations of that? Now, if you live in a rural village, rural places, how the society tends to construct that kind of social structure of living. So we say, oh, I live in Manhattan, I have an apartment in Manhattan. Suddenly, what does it show? You made it. We say, quote unquote, you made it. That means you are successful now materially. But if you're still living in a village, oh, but in the current system, the jobs are all concentrated in the city. I think we have to start rethinking about spreading out regional supply chain, spreading out. And of course, we need higher mobility for that. And if this technology that is being developed in Netherlands comes to fruition, last month, the government of Netherlands invested $250 million in the prototyping it. And it looks like now that the government invested money, that there may be some kind of a good outcome coming out of it. So yes, there's another question. What do you think about our diets in relationship to climate change? It was a wonderful question. What we eat. I think for me, the biggest question is not what we eat. For me, the question is where the food is coming from. I tell my students, when you go to the supermarket, ask yourselves why that food, that all that stuff looks, the vegetables, everything looks so just fresh, so just green. Where did it come from? Where did it come from? How many miles did it travel? So why do we need to eat food that travels 3,000 miles? Why do we want to eat strawberries in January in New York when it is cold? And we don't raise that kind of food. So we need to eat within a radius of maybe 5-mile radius or 10-mile radius within our own, and develop this local agricultural systems. There are a lot of them. In my own neighborhood where I live in Long Island, the local church every Saturday has this little green market. And people come, and thankfully people are beginning to understand that. And so it's okay, this is local food. It grew up in my backyard, in my neighborhood. I know the people who raise this food. And so the element of trust in the economy comes along, instead of bringing food from faraway places. So you're absolutely right about our diet, what we're eating, processed food. I think we have to be a little more conscious, because that's the places we have a lot of viruses growing. Our meat packing places, how we raise our cattle that is becoming our meat at the table, how we raise our chickens that become our food on the table, how we raise all these things. I think we have to start challenging. I'm not saying we don't eat meat. I say, where are they coming from? Why we have big factories really create more problems than anything good, just the satisfaction that they're eating. They're eating basically food that is not very, very healthy. So I think, yes, we have to start thinking what we're eating, but more so where our food is coming from. That we have to start asking questions. And we need to start thinking of, to eat, what is proper to the season, what is raised in the season in that particular area, rather than simply because we have the money, we can afford order the food, the strawberries all the way from Nicaragua and on my table at any time I want. I think we have to start rethinking about these things. And so promoting local farming, promoting local agriculture, that would be a good thing. Thankfully, there's a very good report that came out from Ghana in Africa. The younger fellows who graduating from the universities with degrees in information technology, in computer science and all, suddenly they said they made farming cool. What they've done is they've brought that technology into the farming and kind of mechanized the farming a little bit. So suddenly now people are saying, oh, I'm still farming. Oh, you must be uneducated. You must be backward. And therefore, you're still doing this back-breaking work. Somebody has to make it cool. And the fellows, college students in Ghana are making it cool. And that is really terrific that the young generation today are beginning to revalue this kind of things that somehow for a long time we have looked down on those kind of activities which are really essential for our own functioning. And the wealth gap is even greater due to pandemic. Do you see any changes in our political system and tax structure? Honestly, I hope so. I really want to see changes in our political system. Our current political system is not helping us. It's not helping us the question of the wealth gap. One of my little theories is that the wealth gap we can address to some extent by regional supply chains. By developing regional supply chain, we keep the larger chunk of economy within the bounds, within a particular area, rather than transnational all the way 10,000 miles away and waiting for them to fix our computers or whatever it is. So just think about it, how the regional supply chain will change that whole income inequality that we are experiencing. Yes, due to pandemic, for the next few years, we'll be seeing tremendous gap in income, and we'll be struggling on that area. And I hope, Spain did a very interesting thing a few weeks ago. They introduced what we've been talking about, universal income. Everyone gets, I think, what about 800 euros per month, and then which becomes part of the local economy, and it stimulates local economy as well. So whenever people have this money, they go out and spend, and they spend in the local economy instead of ordering stuff from Amazon, which becomes one corporate profit. You go and buy from local deli, or go and buy from local place, and the money circulates within the community itself. So that's what they are kind of push for it. And so, anybody else have any questions? I know I've gone a little over the time, and hello, and I hope my little conversation or presentation has been helpful, trying to highlight some things. Again, pandemics come and the human nature has not changed. We behave the same way all the time, and always looking for somebody to blame and using these pandemics as a political weapon, and then how the society gets also politicized for somebody's benefit. And I would like to ask everyone to rethink how we talk about pandemics, how we talk about this virus. Is it really our enemy, or is it something that we have to start rethinking? Our relationship with the planet, our relationship with other species. How do we relate to them? Are we in ecology? Are we in a relationship with everything? It's something that I would like to for you to think about, and I hope my little contribution for your thinking about it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Monteiro. This was extremely helpful and informative. As you mentioned, the media has extreme control over the pandemic narrative, and these dominant framings are likely to leave certain legacies or even dependency paths that affect the ways that will respond to future pandemics or prepare to respond to these. So there's a lot to be learned from this situation so that we don't take that with us into the future. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time, your talent, your knowledge. Thank you, everyone who's participating. I'm looking at the time now, and we're a little bit over, which is okay.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to make sure that everyone, if you still have a question, please make sure to submit it. There will also be a copy of this recording on stjohns.edu/alumni resources. This is a great page for you to bookmark on your browsers. It's your one-stop shop for everything alumni related. So any events, alumni stories, resources, as well as these previous recordings for not only this session, as well as some others. So thank you so much. And I'll give you the final word, Dr. Monteiro.
Well, thank you very much. It was a wonderful opportunity to share some of my thoughts. I wrote short pieces on which I blogged it on our International Institute for International Communication. If you go there, you'll find one of the blogs is on after pandemics is what? Are we going to have a renaissance? Are we going to? I kind of discussed those ideas, and also I wrote a little piece on our words, on the language that we use to describe our relationship with the other species on this planet. So, and then the couple of those, many of those questions you have raised. I spent a lot of time thinking about it because I discussed it in my classes on global development, particularly, and how we look at it. And my birds are saying goodbye to you as well. Just both of them, they showed up right on time. One on my shoulder here, and on my head. So thank you, and wish you all the best. Stay safe and stay well.
Be well, everyone. Thank you so much again, Dr. Monteiro, and we'll see you soon.
Anytime, yeah.
Have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.